It was August 13, 1945, and the Demon Core was ready to be unleashed on a horrified Japan that was still grieving from the worst violent attacks anybody had ever witnessed. Little Boy had exploded over Hiroshima a week before, followed by Fat Man in Nagasaki. These were the first and only nuclear bombs ever used in combat, killing up to 200,000 people, and if things had gone differently, a third fatal attack would have followed in their terrible aftermath. History, on the other hand, had different plans. It meant that the functioning heart of the third atomic weapon they'd been working on, a 6.2 kilogram, 13.7 pound sphere of purified plutonium and gallium, wouldn't be needed for the war effort after all. If the war had lasted another 5 years, this plutonium core would have been put into a second Fat Man assembly and exploded above another unsuspecting Japanese city just 4 days later. As it happened, fate had mercy on those people, and the Los Alamos weapon would be kept at the site for additional testing. The first disaster occurred less than a week after Japan's surrender and only 2 days after the Demon Core's aborted bombing run. That mission may not have been launched, but the Demon Core, trapped in Los Alamos, still found a way to harm. Los Alamos scientists were fully aware of the dangers of what they were doing when they conducted radiological experiments with it, a method of determining the point at which the plutonium would become supercritical, the point at which a nuclear chain reaction would release a catastrophic radiation. On the night of August 21, 1945, Daghlian returned to the lab after dinner, to tickle the dragon's tail alone, with no other scientists, just a security guard, around, which was a breach of safety protocols. As Daghlian worked, he surrounded the plutonium sphere with bricks made of tungsten carbide, which reflected neutrons shed by the core back at it, edging it closer to criticality. Daghlian constructed these reflecting walls around the core brick by brick, until his neutron monitoring equipment showed that any more would cause the plutonium to become supercritical. He tried to take one of the bricks away, but in doing so, he dropped it right over the top of the sphere, inducing supercriticality and creating a blue light flare and a wave of heat. Daghlian reached out and grabbed the brick, experiencing a tingling sensation in his hand as he did so. Sadly, it was already too late. He had absorbed a fatal dosage of radiation in that split second. After weeks of sickness and suffering, his burnt, irradiated hand blistered over, and he ultimately went into a coma. He died only 25 days after the tragedy. However, the Demon Core was not yet finished. On May 21, 1946, physicist Louis Slotin, one of Daghlian's colleagues, was doing a similar criticality experiment, lowering a beryllium dome over the core. The beryllium dome, like the tungsten carbide bricks before it, reflected neutrons back at the core, driving it toward criticality. Slotin took care to ensure that the dome, known as a tamper, never entirely covered the core, using a screwdriver to maintain a small gap that acted as a critical valve, allowing enough neutrons to escape. The screwdriver slipped and the dome fell, completely encasing the Demon Core in a beryllium bubble that reflected far too many neutrons back at it. Bremer Schreiber, another scientist in the chamber, whirled around as he heard the dome drop, felt heat and witnessing a blue flash as the Demon Core became critical for the second time in a year. Slotin responded immediately, turning off the tamper piece. Slotin may have been eager to correct his fatal error, but the harm had already been done. He was gone 9 days after the screwdriver slipped. The two fatal incidents, which occurred only months apart, resulted in significant reforms at Los Alamos. New guidelines put a stop to hands-on criticality tests, forcing scientists to handle radioactive cores from hundreds of meters away via remote control gear. Following the Slotin disaster, and the resulting increase in radiation levels in the core, plans to utilize it in Operation Crossroads, the first post-war nuclear explosion demonstrations to take place on the Bikini Atoll a month later, were scrapped. Instead, the plutonium was melted down and reintegrated into the United States nuclear stockpile, where it will be recast into additional cores as needed.